What is up? It's the Pro Football Focus Fantasy Podcast. My name is Jeff Ratcliffe. It is Wednesday, May 20th, and the show goes on. Maybe we'll get some NASCAR tonight, but the show indeed going on here for us. I don't even know how many weekdays in a row this has been, but I tell you what, it's been a lot of fun to share my thoughts with you at a time of the year when I ordinarily would not be doing 5 pods a week, so I appreciate everybody downloading and maybe, just maybe, listening. But want to dive into it today, have a few things to talk about. Do want to have a little bit of fun on the pod today because we're kind of in that dead part of the year where there isn't a ton going on, and especially because of COVID, there's not much going on at all. But there is some news around the NFL, so I want to dive into that. We're going to talk a little bit more about David Montgomery, a topic I mentioned on Monday, and then we'll have a little bit of fun, like I said. But Taysom Hill, let's talk about. He is one of my favorite players in the NFL, and if you know me, you know that I don't really like to say that very often because I try and approach this from a neutral standpoint. I want to give you an unbiased take. As fans, we can be very biased. In fact, I did have a PFF Elite subscriber who hit me up and said, who would you keep out of this list? And, you know, I won't give you the whole list, but he could keep 2 guys, and it really boiled down to Joe Mixon, Austin Eckler, or Miles Sanders. The guy is an Eagles fan, so he kind of wants to keep Miles Sanders, but really the best options are Mixon and Eckler, right? When we're fans, we tend to see things differently, so I try not to be a fan to give you the best takes possible, but I do love me some Taysom Hill. And I mean, for me, it's an appreciation of his overall game. The guy is versatile AF. He can do pretty much anything on the field for you. Running back, wide receiver, kick returner, which to me is still one of the coolest things. But I think the biggest question is whether or not he can actually play quarterback. Because I don't think we know. We really don't know if he can play quarterback. He can come in and play wildcat. That, for sure, we know he is more than capable of doing. And when you look at him, the guy is, I mean, he's a relatively thick guy. It's not like he's like 6'5", or he's 6'6". He goes 6'2", 220. So he's a thicker guy, but can really move. But from a throwing standpoint, he has 13 career passing attempts. He has 6 career completions. 119 yards to be precise. Has never thrown an NFL touchdown, but has thrown an NFL interception. We don't know if he can be a quarterback. However, Jay Glazer was actually asked about or talked about Taysom Hill here and said he thinks he's going to be the guy for New Orleans after Drew Bress retires. The quotes from Glazer over at The Athletic: no smokescreen, he's the guy. Sean Payton loves him. It's not just him. The whole team loves him. So I think there's some things to unpack here because I will tell you, I can't divulge my source, but this is not the first time that I have heard that Taysom Hill will be the guy in New Orleans after Brees is out of the mix. And I heard this from a very big name, somebody who I would take his word as truth that he did, in fact, talk to Sean Payton and did, in fact, hear those words come from Sean Payton's mouth. I heard this during the season, so probably it was around October or November, and it was almost word for word what Jay Glazer said. So when one person says something, sure, it could be a misquote, it could be hyperbole, it could be a flat-out freaking lie. But when you literally hear basically the exact same words from 2 people quoting Sean Payton, for me, there's plenty of smoke here. And I know there's plenty of, like, the retractors are going to say he's old. Well, he's not. He's old for most positions. He's not old for quarterback. He's, 30 years old. He's a little bit older than people realize, but he's not old for quarterback. So, okay, I'm going to toss that one. Is he a good quarterback, though, is the big concern. I'm not going to toss that one because I don't know. I don't know. Taysom Hill could end up being half decent in a quasi-Lamar role. Now, Jay Glazer did say he's a bigger Lamar Jackson. No. Maybe a thicker Lamar Jackson, in body type, but geez, I mean, we're not comparing. These two guys are not on the same plane of existence. Granted, very few people are on Lamar's plane of existence. So either way, he is not a bigger Lamar Jackson. He is a mobile quarterback who we have no idea whether or not he can pass. Now, Lamar, to be fair, Lamar was in somewhat of a similar type category entering last year. A very mobile quarterback, arguably the most mobile quarterback that we've seen in NFL history. He's right there with Michael Vick. And we didn't know if he could throw. Well, we know. Lamar can throw. We know that now. We don't know it with Taysom Hill. What do we do with this information? For me, what I do with this information is, this is confirmation of what I had already heard. I had already started to accumulate a couple shares of him in Dynasty. That's about as far as I'm going to go. The problem, though, is we have an example of the Roto World effect here. And, of course, when we have the Roto World effect, that means you're probably not going to get Taysom Hill on the cheap at this point. So if you have him, you're holding him. If you don't have him, you don't have him. It's not the time to go and acquire Taysom Hill. Positive words being said about Clyde Edwards-Helaire from Eric Bieniemy, who, of course, is the OC in Kansas City. This is the time of year where we get that, though. So, again, don't get too crazy here. He said he has some special traits. Of course. What is he going to say? Yeah, that rookie we took in the first round sucks. He's not going to say that. Of course, he's going to say these sorts of things. So, take it for what it is. I'm still not sold on the fact that the team is going to go out and just hand him a 3-down roll. Now, remember, on yesterday's show, I went through Ben Lindsay's starting lineup projections, and obviously he has Edwards-Helaire as the starter, which would suggest that he'd be on the correct side, the better side of the committee there. I don't know if that happens in September, so we just have to proceed with caution. And the only reason why I want to do this, I don't want to overdraft him only to have a letdown. I don't want to overdraft anybody, for that matter, but only to set ourselves up for a letdown in September, because ultimately when we think about it, this happens every year, but it doesn't really matter that much. You don't win a fantasy championship in September, so if a guy's a little bit of a disappointment there, it really isn't a big deal, but psychologically for a lot of fantasy football players, it ends up being a massive deal, and they freak out, and they trade him, or even worse, I don't think they'll cut a guy you don't cut a guy you drafted in the third round, but you could trade him away a little bit too early, and that isn't a good thing. It's one of those psychological things that happen. So just be careful with this. We have to let this shake out. The good news is I think we're going to have a fairly decent indication of what to expect as we get, hopefully get these guys on fields and hopefully get some beat writers making observations, etc. there with this backfield. I'm not going to change my ranking on him, though, based on a blurb on Roto World. So a couple other things. One of the biggest barriers to the NFL is whether or not when these teams are going to be in their facilities. That we're going in the right direction. In terms of society starting to open up a little bit. Just from my own observations, I don't know about your life, but I had to go out to a store, to Target, right, to go and pick up a prescription. I went to Target. This was earlier today. It's about 2:30 Eastern when I'm recording this. I went there on my lunch break, so a little after noon. Target was freaking packed. Now, everybody had a mask on. It wasn't, and everybody was like distancing themselves. But it wasn't, outside of that much different than what you would expect a Target to look like. So, point of this is simple. Things are starting to return to normal. We're nowhere near normal, but they're starting to get there a little bit. Much, much better than what we were thinking at this time last month. So, as long as we keep seeing this progress, we're trending in the right direction. The NFL is doing everything they can behind the scenes to get this thing off the ground on time. But the big barrier is, they can do all that they want if teams can't be in buildings. If everybody can't be in the building, then it's not going to happen. So that's the hurdle that we're looking at right now with the NFL. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about David Montgomery because I did say this on the pod on Monday that he's not a bell cow for me. I in fact do not think he will be a bell cow here in 2020. And I do think that deserves to be fleshed out just a little bit more. So I want to give that to you here on the show today. I did write up a short piece over at pff.com on this very topic. This is not a knock on David Montgomery, and I don't think it should be taken that way, especially if you're a Bears fan. This is not a knock on David Montgomery. It's simply a byproduct of the backfield he plays in. Now, if you remember from a couple weeks ago, I talked about bell cows, and I defined it as a bell cow was any running back who would account for 60% or more of the expected fantasy points in his respective team's backfield. So last year, Montgomery didn't do that. He was at 49.6%, which was 19th among running backs. And here's the reason, the big thing that holds him back from being a bell cow. Tariq Cohen was only 4 spots behind him at 44.7%. So both of these guys in their backfield, they're in that backfield, in the Bears backfield, were, close to 50%. That's not good for David Montgomery that Cohen was so high. And when you think about it, you look at the targets. I mean, Tariq Cohen was one of the most heavily targeted running backs in the league last year, 102 targets, Montgomery 33. And I know that some people are trying to make this argument because, hey, Ryan Pace did come out and say, we think he can handle a larger workload. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen because we hear these things all the time from GMs, from coaches. Oh, he's going to handle a bigger workload. Well, what is a bigger workload? I mean, are we actually going to try and give him a massive carry share? Are we giving him 280 carries? Because you have Tariq Cohen on the field. You're going to use Tariq Cohen. And you may not use him as much as last year, but you're still going to use him a lot. And I think that the proof is in the pudding. It's not as if towards the end of the season, all of a sudden, we saw an uptick in Montgomery's passing game usage. If anything, we saw the opposite. Over the final 5 games, he had 4 targets. Not 4 targets a game, 4 targets. His season high was 5 targets. Came in week 8. On the season, in 16 games, Tariq Cohen had under 5 targets 6 times. He had over 5 or more 10 times. It's like not even a comparison. And you might be thinking, a little bit of like, well, why is that? And it really comes down to just how these guys were used in terms of the alignment. So when you break it down, last year, David Montgomery snaps. Here's the snaps compared to Tariq Cohen. So he was in the backfield on 592 snaps. He was in line 2 snaps. In the slot, 7 snaps, and out wide, 13 snaps. For Tariq Cohen, he was in the backfield 308 snaps, in line 18 times, in the slot 143 times, and out wide 64 times. So David Montgomery was lined up as a wide receiver, slot or wide, 20 times on the season. Tariq Cohen, 207 times on the season. He's 10x David Montgomery in terms of lining up as a wide receiver. And that is really the difference here. Cohen is going to get these targets if this usage continues. He's going to get these targets. Now, he may not have 103 again, but would it surprise us at all if he has over 80, which 80 is a massive number for a running back. But no, it wouldn't surprise us. So the challenge here, and especially when you consider the team brings in, a tight end in Jimmy Graham, you have your downfield threat, sort of replacement for Taylor Gabriel and Ted Ginn. We know that the short and intermediate, of course, you're going to get some of that for Anthony Miller, and we know that Allen Robinson is Allen Robinson. So where do the extra targets come for Montgomery? Like, where are they coming from? I don't see them coming from anywhere. So I don't think we're going to see much of an uptick at all. And the unfortunate thing here is exactly what we saw. The conversation really started from me talking about Jonathan Taylor. It's exactly what we saw in the Indy backfield last year. Marlon Mack is there. Marlon Mack gets over 200 carries, But you have Nyheim Hines there, so Marlon Mack doesn't get basically any work in the passing game. So therefore, Marlon Mack's fantasy ceiling was basically capped as a, at best, mid-range RB2, and he ends up finishing more as a back-end RB2. I think that's the exact same thing with David Montgomery. And again, not a knock on Montgomery, because I am a David Montgomery truther, but I am also a realist of the situation. He is capped. For fantasy purposes, he is capped. It's unfortunate, but it's true. So be careful with David Montgomery. I think, where he's going, he's the number 27 running back off the board. You're not overpaying for him there. Can he outplay that ADP? Abso-freaking-lutely. He could be the number 22 fantasy running back. But I don't see him being the number 12 fantasy running back. I don't see him vastly outplaying as long as Tariq Cohen is on the field. So there you go. Wanted to flesh that out a little bit more. That, the numbers really paint a very interesting picture there. All right, so the last topic, I finally made my way through The Last Dance, and if you haven't watched that, I think it's phenomenal. I'm a big fan of documentaries just in general, but especially sports documentaries. Love them. Love them, love them, love them. And it was just a phenomenal treatment there. And, of course, we got a glimpse of Jordan in in the baseball role that he was in there for a very short period of time. But also recently we've heard that, that whole LeBron James thing where he was very close to signing with the Dallas Cowboys. I think it's a silly debate when people are like, oh, he wouldn't be any good at football. If LeBron James played anything, eventually, he would be really, really good at it. And he was very good at football in the high school level. He was even there's a story about Urban Meyer when he was at Notre Dame offering LeBron a scholarship early in his high school career, not knowing that he was already the best basketball prospect in the world, basically, early in LeBron's high school career. Anyway, no doubt in my mind, he would have been awesome. He's a freak of nature athlete. I don't think that's the debate, but this did get me to thinking about silly sports debates. So at this time of year, there's not a lot going on, obviously, for our purposes. And you always know it's a slow day in the sports talk radio world when they bring up these types of debates. Like, all right, callers, coming up next, we're going to talk LeBron or Jordan. Who's better? Call in now. We'll get to you after the break. You get that all the time. And it's like, for me, I mean, hey, is there an answer to that question? I don't know. I don't think there is. I mean, they played in very different eras. Jordan is playing in an era that is a completely different game almost than what LeBron is playing. And granted, LeBron's career has spanned this transformational period into what is now the modern NBA of today. But still, it's a tough debate to ultimately settle. It's one of those there's no answer, so ultimately you're going to dig in on one side or the other. So I thought I'd go through some of these debates that really I don't know if there's an answer to. I mean, hey, if I'm gonna give you my answer, I still think it is MJ. I'm not going to go to the LeBron side of it. But either way, there we go. Pete Rose, in or out of the Hall of Fame. Pete Rose, in or out of the Hall of Fame. Call it now. I think he should be in. I think this one is, obviously, there was a reason for this. No doubt about it. And you can't really argue against, if you're fixing things, then, certainly that's problematic. Now, it was never proven that he was fixing anything, but he was betting on his own games. So, not the best thing, but I still think he should be in the Hall of Fame for what he did on the field. His hit record is insane. His hit record is absolutely insane. And he was obviously one of the best players to ever play the game. And to not have him in there, it does seem a bit problematic. Same thing with Barry Bonds, we could almost say. I get it, sure, asterisk. But Barry Bonds, when he was, even before the dejuicing or whatever PEDs he was doing, he was still incredible. And then afterwards, I mean, obviously he became this like massive human being, but I don't think that changes your hand-eye coordination. I mean, his strike zone was unbelievable. And I mean, you could essentially almost not pitch to him for a stretch of several seasons without the fear of him just completely, taking you yards. So I think that's an interesting one. I mean, he was an all-time great in an era where everybody was doing it too, is part of the argument. And I know, by the way, that you may be already going to Twitter and responding to these. Bring it, baby. I want to hear from you. I'm probably not going to get into too many Twitter debates over this stuff. I'm just going to give you my take, but I'd love to hear your take on some of these things. How about this? MLB, should it get rid of DH, or should DH be, basically across the board? This one is an ongoing debate. And for me, I'm not a big baseball guy, even though now all I'm doing is seemingly talking about baseball. I think the DH makes a ton of sense just across the board. There is nothing worse. Than a pitcher getting up there and doing that stupid little bunt thing. Come on. That's not what we want. This isn't entertainment. I get the baseball purists are going to, talk about the strategy behind it, and I understand all of that, but we have to we also have to come to the realization that there is a very real entertainment aspect to this, and that is one of the areas where baseball has suffered a little bit. So if you get, if you have 9 guys in the lineup who are able to hit, I mean, that's just more entertaining to me. And I know a couple pitchers can hit, but for the most part, a lot of those guys just aren't good hitters. Here's another one, and we'll leave it at this. The most impressive record in sports. And this could be, I mean, you could go in so many different directions. In fact, this one, I'm curious of where you are on this one. So hit me up at Jeff Ratcliffe on Twitter. What do you think the most impressive record in sports is? And we can go in so many different directions. You could talk about Gretzky. You could talk about Cal Ripken and his consecutive game streak. You could talk about Jerry Rice and some of the records that he set. How about Wilt Chamberlain and the single game 100 points? Unbelievable. How about the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar scoring? To me, the one that may stand out the most is the DiMaggio hitting streak. That hitting streak off the charts. And I mean, we haven't even seen anybody really sniff it. And the thing about it is, unlike a Kareem record where you're talking about longevity, or Jerry Rice, you're talking about longevity. I mean, granted, high level production, but in order to do it, you also have to be in the league for a very long time. In theory, any hitter could approach it, or at least has the chance in a given season to break that record, and nobody even gets close to it. It's an unbelievable record, but there are so many unbelievable records out there. Anyway, a little sports talk radio topic for you here on a Wednesday in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of May. There we go. That's where we've come to on this podcast. All right, that's going to wrap it up for me today. If you want more on that David Montgomery stuff too, by the way, the article's up at PFF. It's a short read. It's maybe 500 words at the most. And it has, the data broken down, as I mentioned on the show today. Of course, you can check out some of the other stuff we have to offer up there as well at pff.com. On social media, I'm at Jeff Ratcliffe on Twitter and Instagram. And like I said, hit me up on Twitter with some of your responses to the Sports Talk Radio stuff. What station's giving it to you? All right, I'll catch you on the flip side for another edition of the pod. For PFF, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and I'm out of here.